Hello, fellow readers and booktubers. About 30 years ago, An Unquiet Mind was published. This was the memoir of Dr. Redfield Jamison, and she tells the story of how she grew up with bipolar disorder and how at first it wasn't recognized. She knew when she was very young that there was something kind of different about her, but she could not quite figure out what it was. Her family and friends just assumed that she was a young girl filled with energy, sometimes, other times very, very quiet and a bit removed. By the time she got to high school, these mood swings became much more drastic, and she continued to try to hide them. By the time she gets to college, the manic episodes are just uncontrollable, and the depressive episodes are pushing her near suicide. But this also led to her great interest in psychology and psychiatry, and she was able to maintain, and eventually she got the help of some very sympathetic doctors in the field, and they introduced her to various therapies, particularly lithium, and it took a while to find the proper dosage of lithium to kind of balance out these swings in mood. It's not a cure for bipolar disorder, but it is a way to manage it. She then would go on to great success, which she still enjoys today. She's currently a professor in mood disorders and psychiatry at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. But this book, her memoir of those early years and how she finally realized what the situation was a bestseller. It's been reprinted many times. I think this is a more recent paperback edition. I don't know if it's ever really been out of print. It's beautifully written. It's a tragic story at times, other times very sad. In some respects, ultimately triumphant. Of course, there's no cure for bipolar disorder, but she did learn how to manage it. But also, it gave her a much deeper understanding of people who suffer from this, and so she can offer aid and comfort to those who are going through these mood swings and help them to find ways to deal with this. I think the book is very, aside from an interesting read, I think it's a very important book even today, 30 years later, for a number of reasons. One of them, it helps to emphasize one of the benefits of reading, or one of the oft noted benefits of reading, is how it can increase one's empathy for others. There is this unfortunate tendency in American society to stigmatize mental illness. It perhaps isn't as bad as it used to be, but it's still with us. Usually when people who are suffering from great depression are told just to get over it. People with manic depressives are just told, in a manic state, are just told to calm down. Psychiatry and psychology is viewed with great suspicion by a lot of Americans today, and yet it shouldn't be. When you read Dr. Jamison's memoirs, you'll realize that these mood swings are not just moodiness. There's something desperately amiss in the person, and they do need serious help and medication. A book like this can give you great empathy for people suffering from this. And if you know people who are going through this, and it's likely that you might, or if you ever encounter someone who is suffering from bipolar disorder. Also, I thought the book was unexpectedly relevant for today, coming out of the COVID era, the COVID pandemic, in the sense that the United States reaction to the COVID pandemic was kind of interesting. There's always been an anti-intellectualism in American culture and American thought. In the past 40, 50 years or so, there's been an increasing suspicion of expertise and the professional. And just as many people doubt that psychologists and psychiatrists are of any real help during the COVID pandemic, many people doubted that the medical establishment was of any help. So you would get people who would ignore the CDC, and they would ignore their doctors, and they would ignore scientific data that was accumulating, and instead they would turn to podcasters and talk show hosts, people who knew nothing about science or medicine, but people would turn to those personalities for advice that was always worthless and even very harmful. Is very similar to the attitude that people have towards psychiatry. So I thought that was a very interesting thing. And also, you know, the doctors were creating a vaccine that was meant to deal with COVID. People had great suspicion of vaccine, but they would take other odd cures that really had nothing to do with COVID, and some of them were very dangerous. It's very similar to people with mental illness. People with bipolar disorder can take lithium, and it does work, but people won't do that because they're suspicious of drugs. In fact, Dr. Jamison even writes when she was first on lithium, she experienced something that's very common among people who take medications for certain illnesses. They'll be told to take the medication on a regular basis, day after day, week after week, and at a certain point, they feel better and they stop taking the medication. And then, not long after that, they slide right back into all the symptoms and all the struggles and the distressing situations, not realizing that the medication has to be maintained. And it was the same thing with the COVID, the anti-vax business. Is this a suspicion Americans have of any kind of drug, even if the drug can be proven to be effective and helpful in various circumstances? All of this comes out in this book. So, this book can be read as a wonderful memoir, very sad in some respects, but very insightful in others. Memoir of what it's like to grow up with bipolar disorder, but it can also be applied to attitudes in this country today to any kind of illness, or attitudes towards professionalism, attitudes towards doctors, and how populism is really, it can often be very, very dangerous to the well-being of individuals and entire societies. I should add there's a bit of a postscript in this book where she does mention that there was something else that helped her cope with her bipolar disorder. And she said, quite frankly, it was just love, the love of the people around her. She was very fortunate that she was surrounded by people who had a natural empathy, people who were doctors who knew what this was, but people who genuinely loved her. And, love can pull you through just about anything. At any rate, that's all I've got to say about this book. I recommend it, and it's quite good. An Unquiet Mind by Dr. K. Redfield Jamison. That's all I've got for you tonight. Bye-bye.